Chapter 17. Sean felt it like a hammer blow. He couldn't remember being knocked backwards. He just knew that his head was splitting, and there was grit embedded in his hands where they'd broken his fall, and his mind was screaming that something terrible had just happened. Then he staggered to his feet again and broke into a run, all on autopilot, still only vaguely aware of what the fuck was happening. He just knew that something was, and he needed to be there. He stumbled towards the flames and the smoke and the wrecked vehicles and bodies. There was no sound. He wasn't sure if he was deaf or if his brain was just refusing to process the information, denying what he knew had just happened. A bomb. In camp. His hearing came back as his boots pounded on the pavement. A haze hung in the air, and the chemical smell of scorched metal came down on the breeze. The foxhound had been knocked to one side, but its hull was designed to take blasts, and it was relatively undamaged. The lads inside were already clambering out. It was a different story for the 4-tonners. The first had been blown off its wheels and was on its side. Fire was spreading from the cabin and across the rest of the vehicle. The other had jumped off the road and smashed into the gatehouse. Black, oily smoke belched out of the truck and the building. A wolf was parked unattended in one of the spaces there, dented by the blast but still upright. Sean yanked the door open, grabbed the medical kit that was standard issue to all army vehicles, and ran to help however he could. Soldiers were tumbling out the back of the 4-tonner that had hit the gatehouse. Some seemed fine, some were half-stunned and shaky on their legs. But Sean saw that there were bodies scattered around the leyland that lay on its side, some moving, some not. The canvas hood was gone. Shreds of charred material hung from the hoops. For a moment he didn't know where to go, who to attend to. Everywhere he looked he saw someone injured, someone bleeding, someone dead. Blood had been sprayed everywhere. Across the road and the remains of the gatehouse walls, like some kid had come along with a high-powered water pistol filled with red paint. The ground was covered in shattered wreckage, bits of vehicles, bits of humans. Some were stuck to torn pieces of cloth, the camouflage pattern just visible through the blood. Others were on fire, burning brightly as the fat melted in the heat. The air was thick with smells that reminded Sean of a barbecue. The sickly sweet tang of burned meat mixing with lighter fuel. Through the smoky, eye-stinging haze that hung over everything came the sounds of groans, cries. Sean had dealt with injuries before. Like every soldier in the British Army, he was a competent field medic. Fully trained medics were assigned to platoons, but when you were out on a 4-man patrol, more often than not, it was just down to the training you'd received. And that meant being able to deal with anything and everything, usually in the middle of a firefight, right up to stabilizing a seriously wounded mate while securing an area to allow them to be medevaced. In training, they used real amputees to make it realistic. Men who had done all the screaming and yelling for real. Fake blood and horror makeup ensured that it was as close to being there as the army could get. This was different, in every possible way. "Harker!" Sean's head snapped up. Heaton was there too, running past him, also with one of the kits. "Help anyone you can. Stabilize them." "What about Clarkie?" Sean yelled back. She had been waiting by the gate with the Cosworth. She could help out too. Where the... Then he saw it. The Cosworth. Or what was left of it. It was on the other side of the road. Hidden behind one of the 4-tonners, the entire front section had been blasted to nothing. The rest of it was an inferno. It was the source of most of the smoke and flames. Sean started to run towards it, but another yell from Heaton pulled him up sharp. "The wounded, Harker! Clark doesn't matter. Stabilize!" Clark didn't matter. What the fuck was that about, Sean thought. Yeah, she and Heaton didn't get on, but she'd just been blown to pieces. But he also knew what Heaton meant. You concentrated on need, not on who your mates were. A complete stranger dying at your feet took priority over your mucker who was dying somewhere over there. Sean forced himself to turn away from the wreckage of the Cosworth and dropped down beside the soldier nearest to him. The guy had been thrown clear of one of the 4-tonners and was just coming round. "Okay, mate," Sean said, quickly, efficiently, calmly. "I need to check you over, okay? Just lie as still as you can." The soldier moaned, sliding in and out of consciousness. Sean checked him over for broken bones and puncture wounds by sight and by feel. "The medics are on their way," he said, more in hope than conviction. He had found nothing broken, but there was a deep laceration in the soldier's leg. He quickly applied a high-pressure dressing, a wad of sterile, absorbent padding held in place by a couple of strips of bandage, tied into position with a swiftly efficient knot. "You need to apply pressure," he said, guiding the guy's hands to the wound. "Hold this. You're fine, okay? Just stay with it." If the soldier had a job to do, there was more chance he would stay alert. "I've done the fucking training too," the lad muttered. But he did as he was told. Other soldiers were arriving, running towards the scene as fast as they could. Sean moved on to the next casualty, a woman who was sitting dazed among shards of broken glass and shattered metal. She was staring into the distance, rocking back and forth. She didn't seem to notice the compound fracture in her arm. Bone jutted out above her elbow and blood pulsed out onto her combat shirt. "Hey, hey!" Sean got her attention by clicking his fingers in front of her eyes, bringing her back to the here and now. He had nothing to splint the break with, but he wrapped it tight in another bandage. Then he guided her good hand over to hold her damaged arm. "Just hold it straight. Steady, right?" He cocked his head. He could hear sirens, still distant. "They'll be with you in a minute, okay?" He moved on again. "Oh, fuck me," he whispered. The next casualty was Clark. His friend was alive, just. Sean only knew this when he saw something bubbling between her lips. She was one charred mess, from her face down to her knees. It was hard to tell where her skin ended and her clothing began. After the knees, there wasn't anything. Her legs ended in ragged stumps that were slowly weeping fluid. For a moment, it sounded like Clark was weeping herself. She wasn't. There was a long, drawn-out, high-pitched sound which Sean realized was her breathing. Where to start? He was trained for bullet wounds and fractures, not this. Keep them warm. That was it. Part of it. A burns victim would go into shock. Core body temperature would drop dramatically. Sean pulled off his shirt and draped it over her. "Clarky, mate." His voice shook. "Let's have a look at you." He gazed helplessly at the remains of Clark's legs. She could hemorrhage if they were left like that. He fumbled in the bag. "Gonna need a couple of tourniquets here." A hand touched his shoulder, gentle but firm. "We'll take it from here, soldier." And then 2 paramedics were there, crouched over Clark's still form, not even looking at Sean. They tossed his shirt over to one side. Sean slowly picked it up, shrugged it back on, and tore his eyes away from Clark to look round. Several ambulances had turned up, civvy and military. The paramedic crews were at work among the dead and dying soldiers. A fire engine had arrived and its crew were spraying foam on the wrecked vehicles. It looked like a war zone. Sean spent the next half hour helping load casualties into the ambulances that kept on arriving. Adrenaline had him wired. He couldn't stop moving. If he stopped, then his body started shaking. It needed to be occupied. That was until he bent down to pick up another stretcher and realized it was Clark. And she had a sheet over her face, which meant only one thing. And then his body froze. His knees shook and his eyes filled with tears, and he couldn't move. "Take a rest, soldier." The voice in his ear was gentle but firm. He blinked and focused on a Rupert, but a medical Rupert. The guy put out both hands to turn him gently away and propel him in the direction of the barracks. "That's an order." Sean nodded dumbly and stumbled away while they loaded his friend into the meat wagon. Later he sat down away from the destruction, hugging his knees, his back against the high fence that surrounded the barracks, utterly exhausted. His clothes were covered in blood. His nostrils were thick with the reek of what had happened. The smell seemed to have crept down his nose and into his skull. He wondered if he would ever get rid of it. Slowly, deliberately, Sean clenched his right hand into a fist and pushed it into the ground, twisting as it went, keeping it going even when the pain set in. The healed skin split open and his body asked him what the fuck he thought he was doing to it. It hurt. Good. He wanted it to hurt. He wanted to keep his mind fresh. Back in his old life, he had seen lads just seize up like rabbits when it all got too much. When shit started going wrong. Next thing, the cops had them. He wasn't going to do that. He had a vague sense that something had just changed, big time, in his life. Fine. He would rise to meet it. And so he made himself study the scene in front of him, committing it to memory. His first time on the receiving end of enemy action. The bombed area had been taped off. Figures in pristine white suits moved amongst the wreckage, like aliens from another world. The scene was smeared with blood and oil and foam. The bodies were all gone, but nothing else could be touched. It was a job for the civilian police now. The bastards. The bastards! So, this is what it felt like to have a war on your own turf, in your own country. The bastards! Sean kept a lid on his anger, holding it down with both hands. He was used to being mightily pissed off, but this was different to anything that had ever happened to him. This wasn't like someone treading on the guy's turf. It wasn't like that pricky screwing over his mum or him getting nicked. This went deep and personal. Friends had been killed. It was a new type of anger, and he needed to come to terms with it. If he let it all out in one blast, then it would consume him. Heaton wandered over, dropped down next to him. "You okay?" "Oh, yeah. I'm absolutely fine and fucking dandy, mate. Thanks for asking." They sat silently. Heaton pulled out a pack of cigarettes and offered one to Sean. Sean declined with an angry shake of the head, so he lit up on his own. Sean broke the silence at last. He felt his voice shake. Who would put a bomb in a soldier's car? "It's a long list," Heaton said. "They keep sending us to places we're not meant to be. Guess what? We make enemies." Sean shook his head. "I didn't sign up for this," he said. "This isn't right." "Oh, Christ, here we go," Heaton breathed. "I didn't sign up for this. Poor Sean." Sean stared hatred at him. Heaton stared back, his lip curled. "So what did you sign up for, Harker? Being served cups of tea by grateful old ladies? Playing with guns as a dick substitute? Or was it just your get-out-of-jail-free card?" He prodded Sean in the chest with a finger, while Sean mentally weighed up the pros and cons of decking an NCO. You sign up, you're prepared to fight. You put that uniform on, you turn up for duty, it sends a statement. I'm ready to go to war. He got up again. "I'm going to catch a shower. See you around, Harker." The anger was still there when Heaton had gone. For a long time, Sean simply sat there and let it swirl around inside his head. He didn't trust himself to move until he had dealt with it. Because right now, for the first time in his life, Sean felt like killing someone.